My name is Mukund, founder and CTO at Photon. More infamously, I'm also Srini's brother. So neither of us is actually proud about that, but like to get that out of the way early. That being said, yes, we've worked together a long time. Of course, the brother from another mother is Momo, who you'll also meet. First and foremost, thank you for actually like making it here. We do really appreciate your time and like the fact that you guys are all here. Let me actually just do a trial run of this. There we go. It takes like a hard stab to actually make this work. So yes, thank you so much for actually making it. It means a world to us. We're excited. We're excited about the digital space in general. We're excited about the fact that we can speak to each of you. The audience, while larger than the previous like couple of years, is small enough that it can still be interactive. So feel free to. We will have time for Q&A at the end of every session. So feel free to keep this interactive. It's important that we all get to know your point of view, as well as get to answer your questions. Um, in terms of like what I will be covering today, we have a slightly different like structure of how we wanted to do PhotonWorld this year. While we have had customer keynotes and like I mean panel sessions, shorter TED style talks, this year we actually decided to change the structure a little bit to make it focused on key tracks. So each of the keynotes, each of the panels, and each of the talks will be covered as a part of 5 individual tracks. The first track, Srini alluded to this, which we're super passionate about, is the digital enterprise. A lot of the excitement and work that we're doing, questions that our customers are asking, is really how do you go about taking the digital speed of IT and making your enterprise faster, nimbler, more agile in terms of taking it to the next level. We'll do a lot of we've done a lot of thinking around it. We've done a lot of work around it. We are doing a fair amount of work with some of our customers who'll be speaking about it. So that will be one track that we'll be laser focused on in terms of how do you embrace this digital speed and how do you actually take your company to the next level, make it like a Silicon Valley product company which can move faster because they have no legacy. So that's one. Number two is I know we did these predicted trends in terms of how multi-touch point experiences actually will take over. The rise of mobile has been a big part of our growth story. But really, it's been about like more and more front-end touch points being slapped on the same back-end systems. That's been historically true over the last few years. So one kind of segue from the first track is really a revisit of the backend. Is it really time to say, let's look at the backend on your microservices platforms, your big data architecture? Should you actually start, and these are reaching tipping point in terms of technology. So we'll do a lot of thinking around and specific panels around the backend focus that needs to be tied in with these new front-end touch points. It's important to note that it's much easier to sell a front end than to sell back end transformation. Everybody knows that. Everybody's nodding their heads because we all make business cases for a living. And when you make a business case, it's easy to sell a shiny new object. It's really hard to sell invisible software. More information, just check out Srini and my previous company. We sold it for we sold SOA middleware infrastructure for as a foundation for omnichannel for half a decade. Nobody bought it. So we've been much more successful at selling shiny mobile apps, as most of you know. So therefore, the focus on outcomes. So the focus on KPIs, measuring those KPIs, not just when you make a business case for a project, but really how do you track to it? How do you track to it after the launch? Are you getting the ROI that you're forecasted? So that laser focus on outcomes is a key aspect of what we'll cover. So getting to and everybody does this, does a much better job at trying to project what will be conversion number increase, what will be the engagement level when you actually start off a project. But oftentimes the analytics associated after you actually launch is way behind what you the kind of depth that you've gone in prior to the start. So therefore, like a key aspect and a key call to action. And I tend to be prescriptive about my points of view. As most of you who know me well, I'm not shy about stating a point of view. So like a big call to action in this will be about how you manage to outcomes. And therefore manage to KPIs pre, post, and iterate through like these new age digital products. That brings us to a little bit of a take on organization structure. Typical and if you take the larger theme of digital versus IT, which is like kind of like the theme for PhotonWorld across the board, we'll talk a lot about projects versus products. Typical IT portfolio management tends to be funded as projects. There's a project, there's a start, there's an end, and then post-launch, people move on to the next project. That's a little different from how digital products evolve and mature. Digital products are living, breathing things, exemplified by mobile apps, but possibly a lot larger than just mobile apps. They're living, breathing objects that need to be nurtured and nourished over time. So a lot of what we'll speak about is how do you move your funding model, how do you actually think about your organization structure, how do you create a product organization that doesn't have dependencies across like multiple silos of ownership. So that's a fairly large thought process. For each of these, we'll go into like how long it will take. Some of the champion customers that are actually doing this right now that you can actually learn from and then implement in your own organizations. The last part, and possibly the most exciting, will be about like the concept of an invisible and conversational interface. Going from just multi-touch point brand presences to really what we're seeing as a trend of invisible and more conversational interfaces. These are exemplified by the Amazon Alexa and the Echo concept. It could be actually much smaller form factor. The car that Sachin was alluding to, I think eventually will be one of those. So we'll talk a lot about the future of human-computer interaction. There's a separate track about how to design for these experiences, what our learnings have been, how do you design, an Alexa intent, as it's called, which is distinct from building a mobile app, which is explicit intent. So that's we're positive about this kind of future of augmented reality, immersive virtual reality. So at the one extreme will be these invisible kind of ubiquitous computing examples. On the other end is fully immersive. And how do you actually design when the span is so much wider than it was in the past? We'll summarize, and as with for those of you who were at PhotonWorld last year, and I do apologize for my voice, getting slightly under the weather at New York. But I'll segue into Momo, my deputy CTO and SVP of engineering, to actually take us through specific technologies, specific technology trends, and consumer behavior changes that are making each of these possible. So that's what we'll cover today, that I will cover today, and I'll segue into Momo for the last part. I'll be obviously here for the questions. So we talked a lot about the digital enterprise. So this is possibly the largest shift that we are seeing across the industry. Everybody asks us about is it actually people started with mobile, people talked about McKinsey two-speed IT, and then now the kind of the rise, so to speak, of the digital speed of IT actually taking over the traditional enterprise. It is getting to a point where there is a critical mass of activity across the industry on actually making this happen. So when? So first and foremost, I think the relevancy in terms of importance is fairly high. So in the industry adoption, I think there are conversations. I would say 80% of our customers are having conversations around how do you actually get to make that transition. It's challenging many projects. There are many projects that get stalled because the backend systems operate at a different speed. They're waterfall. They don't actually deliver on time. How do you manage dependencies across? So we believe that within the next 12 to 18 months, there'll possibly be a crescendo of this activity, which essentially means you start planning on it right now. The return on investment is extremely high if you're actually able to move the traditional enterprise systems that you have, whether it be core banking, in the consumer banking and financial services industry. It's your core actuarial analysis and policy management in the insurance space. The return on investment is extremely high. However, the way you have to plan on organizational change is also significant. So the opportunity is there. You get the opportunity to leapfrog. Everybody, whether you're a retailer, whether you're in the financial services industry, you're looking at like industries being disrupted. Lance and I were just talking about the Jet acquisition and Walmart, and Walmart's trying to actually get Jet to run their online business, right? Jet.com, and those folks. So everybody wants to operate nimble and fast and agile, like a Silicon Valley startup. They've got a good buzz, but the real threat is that if you don't do it, somebody will actually leapfrog. So therefore, a good example of this, and why I thought it would be great to have the Walgreens folks, customers that we have worked with extensively, actually here, is really leveraging the successes from the digital world and then embracing that in the enterprise. It's possibly not, I do work with them extremely closely. I'm very pleased to be joined by both Jason Fay, head of architecture digital for Walgreens, as well as Tim, the founding father of mobile, as I call him, at Walgreens, who is now actually moved to a new role handling the enterprise systems component. So it's going to be fun. So we are helping them with this transition, how to actually transition from a technology blueprint perspective. Jason will go into the details of that, like gory detail, as Jason likes to, but also a people and process component to it. And finally, eventually the goal is to move like your entire cost model, whether it be banking as a service, whether it be store as a service, as we talk about in the context of Walgreens, but trying to get to a point where you can make everything a variable cost, and therefore ramp up, ramp down, and still maintain agility. It's a high risk, high reward model. The level of buy-in that you need in order to effect change at this level is significant. And really, how much change can an organization take? I think we're definitely asking that question in the context of every one of these engagements. For the folks within Walgreens, definitely they know that we're making that asking that question every day. But that is what we will explore. The second, and we'll talk about the back end focus. Really, if you take the digital space, it has evolved front to back. It started with more and more and more touch points. Started with mobile, then moved on to mobile optimized web, especially in the beauty and cosmetics industry. A lot of work we do is social. So there's social as a channel, Pinterest and others. So it's been about more and more front-end touch points. And then we will figure out the APIs and the integration on the back end. Never happens, actually. Much as, I see some of the folks nodding their head, but yes, and Hari is usually the one who brings you the change request when the APIs don't come in on time. So Hari will be taking the lead on this track. Actually saying the microservice platforms, the big data platforms, to give you that shock zone and the layer in between, if you keep going, Michael, actually are there. The technology is actually getting commoditized to a point where it is not high risk to adopt anymore. So a big part of our focus and our talk track will be we believe in the extremely short term, it will be viable to create an architecture which actually gets to start rethinking how those backend integrations actually happen. The low cost of entry, we think, has just about reached tipping point. The Cloud Foundry infrastructure, or Azure or Amazon infrastructure, makes it almost cookie cutter for you to actually create a truly independently deployable microservice platform. So the microservice platforms are important. The second is really making the data platforms work for you. These could be search platforms like Elasticsearch that we're implementing for many of our customers. It could be like in big data Hadoop clusters. It could be NoSQL databases. Each of those technologies is reaching a tipping point where like really this API economy can become a very low cost of entry, and therefore a progression which is fairly rapid. The one caveat is the upfront work in terms of challenges of getting that like architecture and blueprint right from the get-go is non-trivial. So yes, evolutionary spend is possible, but like actually getting that architecture like actually right will make your like costs a lot more sustainable. In fact, we were talking about that last night over dinner with our like friends over at Nationwide. So it's important to actually get that architectural focus and consistency of adoption of these technologies across the enterprise. And of course, I keep going back to I'm jaded by the fact that selling backend technology is really hard. So therefore, find the right front end, like the front end oriented projects, in order to meaningfully impact the backend. That's really our call to action. Keep going, Michael. So the next component, really outcome-oriented digital transformation. Everybody makes a business case for a project. Everybody actually like tracks analytics. The two are often not correlated. That's reality in e-marketing. That's a little more of a reality kind of in between in e-commerce. That's definitely like true in like in banking and financial services, tends to be much harder to attribute. So therefore, one of the key aspects that we like do think will be like fairly interesting, and like where we're making a big bet, is really tying together project cases in terms of making digital investments a lot more quantifiable. A lot of the digital investments so far are me too catch up kind of like an aspect. My peers have a mobile app. It's better rated than mine. I need to invest on a mobile app. It's a finite use case, but is that really what you want? You got to actually start answering a question like, why do you need a mobile app? Do you need more than a mobile app? And like what makes sense in terms of meaningful impact to your customer base, and tying that together in the context of identified metrics and then 360-degree visibility into those metrics. And therefore it's actually like like a threshold that you set up front, and it's continuous measurement and iteration. This involves attribution modeling. Attribution modeling is like a challenge. So ensuring that like you can actually attribute, say, customer engagement increased to revenue increase. It's an unsolved problem. Attributing retail sales to like actually digital product engagement, finite problem. So I think there's a ton of data science as well as omni-channel data, which is yet unsolved, which will be interesting over the next 12 to 18 months. A lot of interest from our like customers. There's a less of an organizational change. Nobody can actually argue with this. However, the return on investment is quite high. So therefore, like I mean, kind of tying into the fact that if you have the data, which is the previous track, then managing to outcomes becomes a whole lot easier in terms of like each of these aspects, whether they be e-marketing, e-commerce, like servicing, digital servicing in the financial space. This one actually we're quite passionate about, and actually trivia question, like I mean, a typical project organization is a number of silos. Most of you in large like companies actually like go through this. Actually, the background image, as Jim told me, is actually Project Manhattan, and the org structure for it. That's the clip art that he used. But a project is different from a product. And if you want to really embrace the concept of a digital product ecosystem, it's important to say that a product team is fully self-sufficient in order to launch a product beginning to end. Not throwing stuff over the fence, not trying to get buy-in from 100 different people in order to actually make progress. That's the reason much as I'm schizophrenic about the Valley, given the amount of time that we have spent there and the teams and the work ethic. Don't get me started. The one good thing about the Valley is that like there is a concept of like you are on your own. As a small startup, you have no choice. You have no backing of a larger organization. So you figure it out. You figure it out end to end. You got a dozen people, that's all you're gonna get, that's all the funding that you have, but you will figure it out in terms of getting a project and getting a customer experience out the door. This is like is a change from how typical large companies which are matrix organizations operate. You need to get approval from from information security. You need to get like a project manager from a PMO organization. You have a UI UX hierarchy which is completely separate. Doesn't really work. So a big part of like what we've been like focused on, Michael, if you move forward, is really moving to a much more a nimble organization structure, sometimes called a lean organization structure, where a team is fully responsible, empowered to make a decision, be it successful or like a failure. And like it's the responsibility begins and ends there. This does change significantly the cost modeling. So on the one hand, if there's a product owner who's responsible for say requirements and sign off and making decisions, they're in the product, like in the team from start to launch. They go nowhere else. They all work in a single room. For those of you who like have the opportunity to visit our like newest campus in Chennai, you got like actually it's all lean rooms. It's lean labs across like effectively 100,000 square foot floor plate, 97 rooms, each of which like teams come in, work together in a conference room throughout the day. There is no concept of getting a meeting, doing a stand-up, none of that. So we are like passionate about like the improvement in productivity associated with that. There is a fundamental change though, like in terms of like breaking down these silos is hard. Getting in a lean and much more like nimble model, getting it across to the business that you will get a minimum viable product. What does that mean? Like that might be only 80% of the committed feature set because that's what we could get right. You got to live with it. That's a hard transition sometimes conversation to have with marketing, especially like I'll point at like my e-marketing friends. It's hardest to have in the e-marketing space because marketers in general like to get every penny that they paid for and more. So and finally there is an iteration component to it. A product is a living, breathing thing. So therefore, how does your funding model change if you're going to say a team is staying on a product for eternity? They keep working off of like a backlog for eternity, and there is no start and finish to a project. So it's a complete mindset shift. Some of our customers have actually done very well in that transition, and we'll talk a lot about about that transformation. Those are, and we do believe that the timeline to that is fairly is going to be fairly short, and the traction that we're getting is significant. We went back and forth on whether this part of the presentation I do or Momo does, but I'm going to give Momo his benefit of doubt because he's like super passionate about this aspect. But really, the evolution of the human-computer interaction model and conversational interfaces. Let him take over from here. Thank you guys, but I'll obviously be here for like questions.
Just as a word, Mukund.